I don't tip fools. The billionaire's heir barked at the woman that had just served him coffee to humiliate her. But what he didn't know was that the quiet old man she was kind to hadn't just willed her his fortune, but he'd left her a single share of stock and the evidence to take his entire empire down. Welcome to Blissful Whispers. What a way to start, right? We know you're going to love this story. We have an amazing community here, so drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. And if you love seeing the underdog get their revenge, do us a huge favor and hit that like and subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss a single minute of this. The alarm wasn't a beep. It was a brutal, tinny vibration on the cracked screen of her phone, rattling on the cheap laminate nightstand. 5 a.m. blackness. Sadie Jenkins' apartment wasn't just dark, it was cold. The ancient radiator in the corner of her tiny Brooklyn walk-up offered only a hollow clang of protest against the pre-dawn chill. She sat up, pulling a threadbare quilt around her shoulders. Her body ached, a deep, cellular exhaustion that sleep hadn't touched. Her eyes, gritty and unfocused, immediately found the stack on her kitchen counter. It was a monument to her anxiety. A pile of envelopes, stark white and angry red. Final notice. Past due. Most were from Northwell Health, a constant, sharp reminder of her mother's crushing medical bills. The numbers blurred together, a tidal wave of debt she could never outswim. Her gaze drifted from the bills to the corner by the window. This was the other part of her life, the one that was dying. An easel stood folded, a shroud of plastic draped over it. Canvases were stacked against the wall, their surfaces thick with dust. One on top was a half-finished portrait of her mother, smiling from a time before. Sadie ran a finger through the dust on the canvas, a gray streak on her skin. She was a 24-year-old art school dropout, and her ambitions felt as cold and untouched as the paint tubes in her box. There was no time for breakfast. Dinner the night before had been a packet of instant ramen, the salty broth the only hot thing in her day. She pulled on her uniform, a faded blue polo that always smelled faintly of grease, grabbed a stale granola bar and stepped out into the dark. The subway ride was its own special kind of purgatory. The F train rattled and screeched, its fluorescent lights flickering, making the few other passengers look like ghosts. They were the 5 a.m. army. Nurses, construction workers and waitresses, all staring blankly, united by their shared exhaustion. Sadie leaned her head against the cold, vibrating glass, watching the black tunnels of Brooklyn eventually give way to the first sickly gray light of morning over the industrial rooftops of Queens. She pushed open the heavy glass door of the Sunrise Diner at 5:55 a.m. The little bell above it gave a tired jangle. The smell hit her first, a thick, unchanging aroma of stale coffee, sizzling bacon grease, and the sharp tang of industrial bleach. The Sunrise was a relic, a capsule of cracked mustard-yellow vinyl, peeling chrome stools, and Formica countertops worn smooth by decades of plates and elbows. Mitch, the manager, was already behind the counter, sweating over the grill, his face a mask of stress. "You're on coffee, Sadie?" he barked, not looking up from the 6 omelets he was juggling. "The truck shorted us on eggs again." "What am I supposed to do, miracle him out of thin air?" "Morning, Mitch." Sherry, the diner's veteran waitress, was at the end of A station, expertly rolling silverware into paper napkins with the speed of a machine. She'd been at the Sunrise for 20 years, and her face held the permanent expression of someone who'd seen it all and wasn't impressed. She didn't look up. "8 top in the back just sat down," she said, her voice a low gravel. "Want 6 separate checks. Have fun." By 6:30 the diner was buzzing with the breakfast rush. The clatter of plates, the hiss of the espresso machine, and Mitch yelling, "Order up," created a chaotic symphony. Sadie moved through it, a blur of motion, manufacturing a smile that felt as cracked as the porcelain mug she was carrying. A man at booth 3, all pinstripes and impatience, snapped his fingers at her. "Waitress, I've been waiting 5 minutes. Where is my coffee? I said I wanted it hot." Sadie stopped, the heavy pot in her hand. Her smile didn't waver. "Right here, sir. I'm so sorry about the wait. I just made a fresh pot for you." She poured the steaming black coffee into his cup. He didn't look up from his phone, just grunted. "This tastes burnt." The smile tightened at her edges, but it held. "I apologize for that. Would you prefer a tea on the house? Or I can make you a fresh pour-over from the back. It's a much smoother blend." "Fine. Whatever." Just be quick about it. Sadie nodded, right away, and turned back to the counter, her shoulders slumping for just 1 second before she forced them straight again. Sherry slid past her, 3 heavy plates balanced perfectly on her left arm. She'd seen the entire exchange. She leaned in, her voice low and sharp. You get paid the same for smiling, kid. Save the effort. He's still going to tip you $1. Sadie just nodded, her smile finally fading as she turned her back. She gripped the cold stainless steel counter, took a deep breath, and pinned the smile back in place. The grind continued. The breakfast rush was a tidal wave of noise and motion. Mitch, red-faced and sweating, yelled, "Order up, pick it up," every 10 seconds. Sherry moved like a shark through the narrow aisles, her face a mask of practiced indifference. The clatter of plates, the sizzle of the grill, and the demands of customers created a chaotic symphony that Sadie navigated on autopilot. Then, at 7:15 a.m. on the dot, the bell above the door gave its familiar jangle. Silas Croft shuffled in. He was as much a part of the diner's worn-out furniture as the wobbly salt shakers. He wore the same faded tweed coat every day regardless of the weather, and his eyes were perpetually fixed on the floor. As he made his slow, shuffling journey to the back corner booth, Booth 4, his booth, the diner's chaos parted around him and then closed in as if he were a rock in a fast-moving stream. Mitch didn't look up from the grill. Sherry, seeing him sit, actively turned and started wiping down a clean counter to avoid him. He was a lousy tipper, a waste of a fur top. He was invisible. But not to Sadie. She saw him, and the tight knot of stress in her shoulders eased for just a moment. Breaking from a table she was clearing, she grabbed a clean, heavy porcelain mug and the steaming coffee pot. She arrived at his booth just as he was settling in. "Good morning, Silas," she said, her voice soft, not demanding a reply. She poured the coffee black and hot. He didn't look up, offered no greeting, but gave a short, sharp nod. It was all the acknowledgement she ever got, and it was enough. "The usual, then?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Rye toast, extra crisp, and a side of applesauce." A low grunt from behind the menu. That was a yes. She put the order in, delivered a tray of pancakes to a family of 4, refilled 3 other coffees, and then picked up his plate from the pass. She set it down in front of him. The toast was dark and hard, just as he liked it. The small white bowl of applesauce sat beside it. Sadie paused. This was the second part of the ritual. She watched as Silas picked up the dull, serrated diner knife. His knuckles were swollen and white, the joints inflamed with arthritis. His fingers trembled, struggling to grip the knife handle and pin down the crusty toast at the same time. He began to saw uselessly at the bread. His frustration was a quiet, vibrating thing, a private humiliation he endured every morning. Sherry, from across the room, caught Sadie's eye and tapped her wrist, mouthing, "Move it." Sadie ignored her. She leaned in gently, her voice barely a whisper. "Allow me, Silas." She didn't wait for an answer. She carefully took the knife from his unresisting fingers and slid the plate toward her. With 3 quick, practiced motions, she cut the toast into 4 perfect, manageable squares. She slid the plate back in front of him, placing the knife neatly on the side. He paused. His watery blue eyes, usually so vacant, flickered up to meet hers for a single fleeting second. There was no gratitude, not really. It was a flicker of surprise, of pure, unfiltered acknowledgement. Then just as quickly the mask was back. He looked down at his plate, grunted, and picked up the first square. Sadie left him in peace. It was their silent contract, a small moment of dignity offered and accepted without ceremony. She was halfway across the room with a tray of eggs when the bell jangled again. The sound was different. It wasn't a customer, it was an entrance. The entire diner's chaotic buzz seemed to dip. Griffin Croft III strode in. He was the absolute antithesis of Silas. Where Silas was faded, Griffin was razor-sharp. He wore a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than Sadie's last 6 months' pay. A blast of expensive, woody cologne preceded him. His dark hair was perfectly coiffed, and his handsome face was twisted into a sneer of profound distaste as his eyes scanned the dump. He looked like he was afraid to breathe the air. "Grandfather," he barked. The volume made Sadie jump, and several customers looked up, annoyed. Griffin's eyes had locked on the back booth. He didn't walk. He stalked over, his polished Italian leather shoes clicking with sharp, impatient taps on the sticky linoleum. He stopped at the table, towering over the old man. Silas didn't look up. He just continued to slowly eat a piece of toast. I've had the driver circle the block 3 times, Griffin snapped, his voice a whip of entitlement. The board pre-brief is in less than an hour. What are you doing here? Must you play peasant in this grease pit? He gestured around the room, wrinkling his nose at the smell of bacon. Silas deliberately, agonizingly, took a slow sip of his coffee. He still hadn't looked at his grandson. This silent defiance seemed to enrage Griffin even more. With a huff of theatrical disgust, he reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a gleaming gold money clip, and peeled off a crisp $100 bill. He slapped it onto the table, the paper landing precariously close to the applesauce. Here, he spat. For your, whatever this is. The car is waiting. Do not be late. Sadie was frozen by the coffee machine, her knuckles white on the pot handle. The blatant disrespect, the way he spoke to the old man, like he was a disobedient child and inconvenience, made her stomach clench with a hot, vicarious anger. It was ugly. Silas finally, slowly lifted his head. His vacant blue eyes were gone. In their place was a gaze as cold and hard as glacial ice. He stared at Griffin, a long, unnerving, and utterly silent moment. He didn't say a single word, but the pure, undiluted fire in that look was so potent that Griffin's arrogant mask faltered. He actually took a small, involuntary step back. Attempting to regain his composure, Griffin scoffed. Fine. Be stubborn. I'll be in the car. He turned on his heel and strode out, letting the glass door slam shut hard enough to rattle in its frame. The diner's noise rushed back in, filling the vacuum. Sherry, who had watched the whole thing with wide eyes, immediately sauntered over to booth 4. Before Silas could even react, she palmed the $100 bill. Well, hello there, she purred, tucking it deep into her apron pocket. She shot Sadie a conspiratorial wink. See? Rich jerks have some uses. Beats your dollar-tipping pinstripe any day. She walked away, visibly pleased with the windfall. Sadie just stared at the door Griffin had slammed. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated disgust. She looked back at Silas. He had returned to his toast, his hand trembling slightly more than before, as if the entire confrontation had never happened. She walked over, her face softening. Without a word, she refilled his coffee mug. She quietly cleared the empty applesauce bowl, her movements gentle and deliberate. He didn't look up, but he didn't have to. The ritual was complete. It was a Tuesday, and the rain was coming down in cold, gray sheets, hammering against the plate glass windows of the Sunrise Diner. The diner itself felt damp, the air thick with the smell of wet wool and sizzling sausage. Sadie kept glancing at the clock. 7:15 a.m. The bell on the door jangled as a construction worker shook out his umbrella. Sadie's head snapped up, a hopeful smile ready. It faded when she saw it wasn't him. Booth 4 remained empty. She went through the motions, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She poured coffee for the regulars at the counter, delivered a short stack to a student in booth 2, and cleared plates from a family of tourists. But her eyes kept flicking to the door and then to the clock. 7:30 a.m. Order up, Sadie. Mitch yelled, his voice tight with stress. Sadie jumped, nearly dropping a clean mug. Her focus was shot. Sherry glided past, a full tray balanced on her shoulder. Waiting for your boyfriend, kid? She sneered, not unkindly, just stating what she saw. Don't hold your breath. Old guys like that drop off the map all the time. Probably just found a warmer place to sit. That's not funny, Sherry, Sadie murmured, her gaze fixed on the empty booth. He was never late. Never. Not in the 8 months she'd been working the morning shift. The ritual was as reliable as the sunrise itself. 7:45 a.m. The knot in her stomach was no longer anxiety, it was a cold, heavy dread. This wasn't just a break in her routine. She was genuinely worried. What if he'd fallen? He lived alone, she was sure of it. He had that profound, untouchable loneliness about him. What if he was lying on his floor, needing help? She found herself at booth 4, compulsively wiping down the already clean Formica tabletop. She refilled the salt and pepper shakers. She straightened the sugar caddy. It was a nervous, useless gesture, as if preparing the space would somehow summon him. 8:05 a.m. The bell jangled. This time the sound was different. It cut through the diner's dull roar, silencing it completely. The clatter of silverware stopped. The sizzle from Mitch's grill suddenly seemed deafeningly loud, and then it too seemed to hush. Every customer, every staff member turned to the door. It wasn't Silas. Two men entered first. They were built like refrigerators, carved from granite and stuffed into immaculate black suits that looked painfully out of place in the greasy spoon. Their eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the rain, weren't looking at anyone. They were scanning. They moved with a fluid, disciplined precision, one flanking the door, the other stepping aside. They were making way for a third man. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a full head of silver hair swept back from his forehead. He wore a tailored charcoal gray suit that whispered of incredible expense. In his hand he carried a pristine, dark leather briefcase. He didn't look at the diner. He seemed to be assessing it, his expression one of mild distaste and focused, impatient purpose. Mitch, spatula still in hand, wiped his greasy palms on his apron. "Can I, help you folks?" His usual bluster was gone, his voice a weak croak. The silver-haired man ignored him. His gaze swept the room, dismissing the customers, dismissing Mitch, dismissing Sherry at the counter. His eyes scanned, and then, with unnerving, absolute precision, they landed on Sadie. She was frozen by the coffee machine, a fresh pot still clutched in her hand. He walked directly toward her. His expensive Italian shoes made soft, decisive sounds on the sticky linoleum. The two bodyguards moved with him, a silent, menacing perimeter that sucked the air out of the room. He stopped 3 feet in front of her, trapping her between the counter and his unassailable authority. "Are you Miss Sadie Jenkins?" His voice was deep, calm, and resonated with a power that demanded an answer. Sadie's heart was hammering against her ribs. She felt like she'd been caught doing something wrong, but she didn't know what. Was this about her loans? Her mother? She could only nod, her throat suddenly dry. "My name is Julian Cole," the man said. "I am a senior partner at the law firm of Garrison, Pierce & Dunn. I was the personal attorney for Mr. Silas Croft." The name, Croft, hung in the air, sounding foreign and important. It took her a second to connect it to the quiet old man. "Silas?" she whispered, her first thought inexplicably for him. "Is he okay? He didn't come in this morning." Mr. Cole's expression softened, but only fractionally. It was the practiced, professional empathy of a man who delivered bad news for a living. "Mr. Croft passed away peacefully in his sleep late last night." The heavy porcelain coffee pot in Sadie's hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. A wave of absurd, unexpected grief washed over her. She barely knew him. He never spoke to her. But their silent ritual, that small, stable point in her chaotic, spinning world, it was gone. "Oh," she said, her voice small. Tears pricked the back of her eyes. "Oh, I'm so sorry." The entire diner was wrapped in a breathless, stunned silence, witnesses to a drama they couldn't understand. From the counter, Sherry's voice, sharp and ugly, sliced through the quiet. "Passed away? Geez. What, did he leave you his $2 tip in a will?" Sadie flinched. The casual cruelty of it was a physical slap. Julian Cole did not turn. He did not acknowledge Sherry in any way, ignoring her as if she were a fly buzzing against the window. His focus remained locked on Sadie. "Mr. Croft was a man of very specific and very recent instructions," he said, his voice firm again. "His final will and testament contains a provision that requires your immediate presence." Sadie stared, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. "Me? I think you have the wrong person. I just served him coffee." "There is no mistake, Miss Jenkins," Cole said, his gaze sharp, cutting through her bewilderment. "Mr. Croft was quite clear. And he was very specific." He paused as if consulting a mental file. "About the young waitress who, for the last 8 months, cut his rye toast into 4 equal squares. Every morning. Without fail. Because she noticed his hands shook. The detail. That specific private scene detail. It hit Sadie harder than the news of his death. He had noticed. He saw her. "If you would be so kind as to gather your things," Mr. Cole continued, "a car is waiting. We must be at my office in 1 hour for the reading." Sadie looked numbly at Mitch, who just gaped. She looked at Sherry. Sherry just stood there, her jaw slack, her eyes narrowed into hostile slits. The initial mockery was gone, instantly replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated, bitter envy. She was already judging Sadie, already hating her for something she didn't even understand. It's amazing how fast people turn on you, isn't it? The second it looks like you might get something they don't, the knives come out. If you believe kindness should be rewarded, not mocked, hit that like button. Only people who side with the Sherrys of the world would ignore it. The elevator ride was silent and agonizing. Sadie, standing between the two massive suited bodyguards, felt like a prisoner being transferred. The car was all polished brass and dark, gleaming wood, and it climbed with a smooth, silent speed that made her stomach drop. She was acutely aware of the small grease stain on her apron, which she'd untied in a numb daze and was now clutching in her hands. She could smell the burnt coffee on her clothes, a stark contrast to the faint, expensive scent of leather in the elevator. The doors opened not into a lobby, but directly into the 80th floor offices of Garrison, Pierce, and Dunn. The world transformed. The floor was a sea of white marble, reflecting a panoramic, godlike view of the Manhattan skyline. The rain that had been hammering the Sunrise Diner was, up here, a silent, abstract veil over the city. The air was hushed, smelling of old books, floor polish, and a kind of wealth so profound it had its own atmosphere. Julian Cole led her down a long, art-filled corridor. Sadie felt her worn-out sneakers squeak on the marble, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. She was a stray cat that had wandered into a palace, and she just wanted to hide. They entered a vast boardroom dominated by a mahogany table so long and polished it looked like a dark, still lake. At the far end, two people were already seated. The woman, Genevieve Croft, was the picture of aristocratic ice. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a flawless chignon, pearls gleamed at her throat, and she regarded Sadie's entrance over her reading glasses with a look of bored, clinical disdain. Beside her, Griffin Croft III was practically vibrating with impatience. He was tapping a gold pen on the table, his leg bouncing, his handsome face set in an arrogant, petulant scowl. He gave Sadie a single dismissive glance that swept from her sneakers to her messy bun, and then he looked away as if she were a piece of furniture. "Please have a seat, Miss Jenkins," Julian Cole said, gesturing to a single, solitary chair at the other end of the massive table. The distance felt intentional, a chasm separating two different species. Sadie sat, her hands clenched in her lap on top of the wadded-up apron. The chair was leather, and it sighed as she sat down. "Now that all parties mentioned in the primary codicil are present, we can begin," Cole announced. He opened a thick, leather-bound document, put on his own reading glasses, and began to read in a dry, emotionless monotone. Most of it was a language Sadie didn't understand. Legal jargon about trusts, endowments, fiduciary responsibilities, and bequests to foundations she'd never heard of. She heard staggering sums being discussed, millions, tens of millions, numbers that felt like concepts, not actual money. She was a spectator at a play she didn't understand, all while the raw grief for Silas, the quiet old man, sat like a heavy stone in her chest. Then Cole paused. He looked up, first at Genevieve and Griffin, then down the long table at Sadie. "To my daughter-in-law, Genevieve Croft, and my grandson, Griffin Croft III, I leave the contractually obligated principal sums of their respective family trusts. This amounts to $20 million each." Griffin scoffed, slamming his pen down. 20? That's it? That's an insult. The company is worth billions. Silas liquidated the majority of his personal assets over the last 2 years, Griffin, Genevieve said, her voice a low, cold hiss. This is what he wanted. Her fury was palpable, though barely contained. What he wanted was to be senile, Griffin shot back. "I am not finished," Julian Cole said, his voice cutting through their argument. He looked back at his papers, then directly at Sadie. Her heart leaped into her throat. "We now come to the final personal bequests. To Miss Sadie Jenkins, the waitress at the Sunrise Diner who, in a world that saw only a nuisance, showed an old man kindness. Who treated him with a dignity he had not known in years, and who, without fail, cut his toast because she noticed his hands shook." Sadie gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The tears she'd been holding back now streamed hot and fast down her cheeks. He had seen everything. "To Miss Jenkins I leave a legacy of kindness returned. I bequeath to her the sum of $250,000, to be transferred to her account immediately, to ease her burdens as she once eased mine." The room tilted. $250,000. Was a miracle. It wasn't just money, it was her mother's care for years. It was the medical debt gone. It was the student loans erased. It was the first clean, full breath she could take in half a decade. You have got to be kidding me. Griffin exploded, leaping to his feet. The chair screeched back on the marble. $250,000? To the help. He was insane. This is grounds for a contest. I'll have this thrown out by lunch. Griffin, sit down. Genevieve ordered, her face pale with fury. You are making a scene. I am not finished, Julian Cole repeated, his voice like granite. Griffin, breathing hard, slowly sank back into his chair, his eyes fixed on Sadie with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Cole adjusted his glasses. And finally, to Miss Jenkins, I also bequeath in its entirety the property and business known as the Sunrise Diner, located at 34 to 12 Astoria Boulevard. Griffin let out a sharp, ugly bark of a laugh. The diner? He left her the dump? Oh, that's rich. How perfect. A cage for his little pet waitress. Grandfather really did have a twisted sense of humor. Julian Cole held up a single, imperious finger, silencing him. Along with the attached capital improvement and operations portfolio, established for its long-term viability, currently valued at $5 million. The laughter died in Griffin's throat. It was as if he'd been punched in the stomach. His face went from flushed red to a sickly, blotchy white. Genevieve's carefully constructed mask of bored aristocracy shattered, her mouth falling open in a silent, ugly O of disbelief. Sadie just stared. Her mind couldn't form the number. $5 million. The room was spinning. She gripped the arms of the leather chair, her knuckles white. Griffin didn't just stand this time. He launched himself. You, he roared, a primal, animalistic sound. He lunged, not at the table, but onto it, his polished shoes scattering papers as he tried to scramble across the mahogany lake toward her. You little gold-digging thief. Sadie screamed and threw herself back, her chair toppling over as she fell to the marble floor. The bodyguards, who had been standing impassively by the door, moved with a speed that was terrifying. Before Griffin could take a third step, one of them had vaulted onto the table, intercepted him mid-lunge, and grabbed him in a hold that was both brutally efficient and perfectly controlled. Get your hands off me! Griffin shrieked, his voice cracking with rage as he was hauled off the table and slammed back into his chair. He was breathing like a winded bull, his suit jacket torn at the shoulder, his face a mask of pure, murderous rage. He fixed his gaze on Sadie, who was cowering on the floor, and he pointed a trembling finger. This isn't over, he seethed, his voice dropping to a venomous promise that was more terrifying than his roar. You think you've won? I will have my lawyers crawl over every second of his last year. I will prove he was incompetent. I will prove you manipulated him. I will drag you through so much legal hell, you'll be begging to go back to scrubbing grease traps for your goddamn tips. Griffin is the kind of bully who thinks his money and his name give him the right to threaten, to intimidate, and to dehumanize anyone he sees as beneath him. He can't stand that a simple, decent person was valued over him. We all know someone like that who uses their power to crush others. Comment, I stand against bullies, if you're not on Griffin's side. Let's see who is. Mr. Croft, I will have you removed, Julian Cole said, his voice deadly calm. He motioned to the second bodyguard, who moved to stand directly beside Griffin. Cole then looked down at Sadie, who was being helped to her feet by the first guard. His expression was all business. Ms. Jenkins, this concludes our business for today. A car is waiting to take you home. My office will be in touch tomorrow to begin the transfer of assets. Do not, under any circumstances, speak to Mr. Croft. Sadie, trembling so hard she could barely stand, just nodded. She was escorted out of the room, the sound of Griffin's furious, sputtering threats echoing behind her, a declaration of a war she had never ever wanted to fight. Sadie didn't sleep. She sat on her threadbare sofa, staring at a cashier's check for $250,000 that a courier had delivered at 7 a.m. It felt like counterfeit money, a prop from a play she'd been unwillingly cast in. The number was meaningless. All she could hear was Griffin Croft's voice, I will drag you through so much legal hell. All she could feel was the bone-deep terror of his threat. But at 9 a.m. she stood in front of the Sunrise Diner. She wasn't wearing her apron. She was just Sadie in her own worn jeans and a faded hoodie. Taking a shaky breath, she pushed open the glass door. The bell jangled, an accusation in the dead-silent room. The diner was open, but it was empty. No customers. The grill was cold. The coffee machine was off. Mitch, Sherry, and the two kitchen staff, Cookie and Maria, were standing in a tight, hostile line behind the main counter. They were waiting for her. It was an ambush. Sadie's stomach twisted. Their faces weren't joyful or even curious. They were masks of raw fear and deep, simmering resentment. Sherry especially. Her arms were crossed, her jaw set, and her eyes were narrowed into venomous slits. "Well, well," Sherry said, her voice dripping sarcasm. "Look who it is. Her Highness graces us with her presence." She untied her own apron, balled it up, and threw it onto the counter with a wet thwack. "So what now, boss?" The word boss was an insult, a thing she spat. "You gonna fire us all? Redecorate the place in gold leaf? Maybe turn this dump, as your boyfriend called it, into one of your snotty downtown art galleries?" "Griffin's not my boyfriend," Sadie snapped, her voice coming out sharper than she intended. She recoiled, softening. "No, Sherry, of course not. That's not. I don't want anything to change." She looked at the small, hostile crowd, her hands twisting together. "I mean it. I want everything to stay exactly the same. You all still have your jobs. Mitch, you're still the manager. Sherry, you're still head waitress. Nothing changes. I promise." Mitch, who had been silent, his face ashen, just let out a short, bitter laugh. It was a terrible sound. "Stay the same?" he said. He shook his head, looking utterly defeated. "Sadie, you don't get it." He reached under the counter and pulled out a thick, dog-eared ledger book, its cover slick with a thin film of grease. He tossed it onto the counter, where it landed with a heavy, final thud. Beside it, he dropped a stapled stack of spreadsheets. "You really don't get it at all." Sadie stared at the books, confused. What is this, Mitch?" "That," he said, tapping the ledger, "is the Sunrise Diner. The real one. The one you didn't see while you were pouring coffee." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "About 6 months ago, some holding company I'd never heard of, AP Holdings, made me an offer for this place. It was a stupid offer. More money than this dump was worth in a million years. I thought it was some big real estate developer who was just going to tear it down for condos. I signed the papers, I took the money, and I was out." "But you stayed," Sadie said, her dread building. "You're here every day." "Yeah," Mitch nodded, his eyes dead. "As a salaried manager. My job was simple. Keep the doors open and send the weekly reports to their accountants. I never met the owner. Never even spoke to a real person. I just sent the reports." "What reports?" Sadie's voice was a whisper. Mitch flipped open the ledger and jabbed a finger at the spreadsheet. "These. The real numbers. The ones that show our food costs are up 40% in 2 years. The ones that show our morning rush, our bread and butter, is half what it was 3 years ago thanks to that new Starbucks on the corner. The ones that show this place. Sadie." He looked her right in the eye. "This place is bleeding." He slid the top spreadsheet toward her. Look at the bottom line." Sadie's eyes found the number. It was at the very bottom of the page in parentheses, printed in sharp, undeniable black ink. A huge number. "We are losing," Mitch said, his voice flat, "just under $50,000. Every single month. We have been for the last year." Sadie's blood didn't just run cold, it turned to ice. She gripped the counter to stay upright. The $250,000? The $5 million? This wasn't a gift. It was a problem. "Silas," she whispered, the name tasting like ash. "Silas Croft, he was AP Holdings. He knew. He knew this place was failing. He's the only reason we're still standing," Mitch said, his voice heavy. "His giant, faceless company was just absorbing the loss, paying our suppliers when I couldn't, covering our payroll every time the register came up short. Without him, we would have been bankrupt and boarded up by Christmas." And then it hit her. A horrifying, perfect, and malicious clarity. Griffin's laugh. That ugly, barking laugh in the boardroom. The diner? He left her the dump? A cage for his little pet waitress. It wasn't just a mean-spirited joke. It was the truth. She wasn't given a fortune. She was handed a poison chalice. A financial black hole, a dying business, a trap designed to suck her dry. Griffin and Genevieve, they knew. They knew the diner was a failure. This was their revenge. Julian Cole's words came back to her. The attached capital improvement and operations portfolio, valued at $5 million. It was a portfolio attached to the business. She couldn't just take that $5 million and run. It was legally tethered to this sinking ship. This was the legal hell Griffin had promised. He and Genevieve were going to let her try. They would watch from their penthouses, sipping champagne as the little gold digger poured every last penny of her newfound wealth into this pit, trying to honor a promise to a staff that already hated her, until she had nothing left. They were just waiting for her to fail. Griffin and Genevieve set this trap, counting on Sadie to be exactly who she is. A good person who would try to do the right thing. They want to see her crushed under the weight of a dying business, all while they sit back and laugh. They are the kind of entitled people who believe that if they can't have something, they must destroy it. If you're sick of entitled people rigging the game against hardworking folks, hit subscribe right now. Only those who support that kind of toxic arrogance wouldn't. Sadie looked up from the terrifying numbers. She looked at the 4 hostile, expectant faces of her new employees. They weren't her coworkers anymore. They were her responsibility, her burden. The joy of her inheritance was gone, evaporated in an instant. In its place was the cold, metallic taste of pure fear. She was trapped. The back office of the Sunrise Diner was a windowless 10x10 box crammed with overflowing boxes of paper cups and stacks of invoices. Under the buzz of a single flickering fluorescent bulb, Sadie sat at a tiny metal desk, drowning. She was staring at the spreadsheet Mitch had given her, the one showing a projected loss of $50,000 for this month alone. The $5 million in the operations portfolio suddenly felt like a handful of sand. It was a countdown clock. At this rate, she'd be bankrupt in less than 2 years. Griffin's trap was perfect. It wasn't a question of if she would fail, only when. The realization was a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. She was going to lose it all, the diner, the money, and any hope of saving her mother. A sharp knock on the open door made her jump. Julian Cole stood in the doorway, his tailored suit looking absurdly out of place against the backdrop of peeling paint and stacked ketchup boxes. He held a slim, elegant envelope in his hand. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, his expression unreadable. "I came as soon as I could. I anticipated complications." Complications. Sadie laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "Mr. Cole, this isn't a diner, it's a financial black hole." Griffin knew. He was laughing at me. "This is a cage. It's a trap." Cole nodded, unfazed. "It is. Or rather, it was." Silas was a complex man. He set many games in motion. He stepped forward and placed the envelope on the desk, on top of the terrifying spreadsheets. "He left this for me to give to you after the will reading. And only if you return to the diner." Sadie's fingers trembled as she picked it up. Inside there was no check. Just a single old-fashioned heavy brass key and a handwritten note on thick cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was shaky, but the intent was firm. It read, "Sadie, the money is for the diner. This key is for you." A new address was scrawled below it. An address on the Upper East Side. The doorman, dressed like a 4-star general, looked down his nose at her faded jeans until Julian Cole, who had driven her, stepped out of the black town car behind her. The man's posture snapped to attention. The private elevator opened directly into the apartment. Sadie stepped out and forgot to breathe. It was vast. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, the trees a sea of green far below. But it wasn't a home. It was a museum. A lonely, silent, dusty museum. A real Monet, the water lilies, hung over a cold marble fireplace. A Degas sculpture of a dancer sat on a pedestal. The air was still and tomb-like, smelling of old money, lemon polish, and disuse. This was Silas's gilded prison. "He hadn't allowed anyone up here in over a decade," Cole said quietly. "Not even his family. This was his sanctuary. The study is down the hall." He waited by the elevator as Sadie walked down a long, dark corridor. She found the door, heavy, imposing oak. The brass key slid into the lock with a satisfying, oily click. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The rest of the apartment was a cold, sterile gallery. This room was alive. It was warm, paneled in dark wood, and smelled of something comforting and sharp: pipe tobacco, old paper, and leather. Books crammed shelves from floor to ceiling. A massive, worn leather armchair sat facing a fireplace. but it was the wall behind the desk that held her. It was a massive corkboard stretching from one end of the room to the other. It was a general's war map. A complex, terrifying spiderweb of colored string-connected stock charts, legal documents, surveillance photos, and handwritten notes. This was the real Silas Croft. This was the mind that had built an empire. Her eyes found Griffin first. A whole section was dedicated to him. Photos of him on yachts in Monaco, at nightclubs, looking drunk. Stapled to the board were copies of cashier's checks, casino receipts from Vegas, a detailed, scathing report on a failed tech venture, with Silas's own red ink scrawled in the margin. Failed venture. $30 million loss. Reckless. Then her gaze was drawn to the very center of the web. It wasn't a stock ticker. It was a small, empty space, a quiet eye in the storm. Pinned in the middle of it was a single, faded photograph of a woman with a warm, laughing smile, standing in front of a small, charming storefront. The sign read, Clara's Kitchen. Beside it, Sadie saw newspaper clippings yellowed with age. Promising restaurateur Clara Croft dies in tragic accident. Vance Industries acquires bankrupt cafe chain. And then years later, Croft Consolidated announces hostile takeover of Vance Industries. It was a story of love, loss, and decades-long revenge. Tears pricked Sadie's eyes. He had lost his wife, who owned a small, humble place just like. Her breath caught. Pinned just below the photo of Clara was another, more recent picture. A candid, blurry snapshot, clearly taken from a distance. It was her. It was Sadie in her blue polo, standing in the Sunrise Diner. She was leaning over booth 4, her back partially to the camera, in the unmistakable motion of cutting Silas's toast. And pinned beneath it, a single, shaky, handwritten note. She has her heart. The tears streamed down her face. It was never a test. He wasn't testing her. He was searching. He was a lonely, grieving widower, sitting in a greasy spoon, looking for one last spark of his wife's spirit in a world that had taken her from him. Her fingers went to the file labeled Clara. Tucked inside, almost as an afterthought, was a single, formal, embossed document. It wasn't money. It was a stock certificate. Certificate of stock. 1 share. Croft Consolidated. It seemed so small, so insignificant. But then Julian Cole's voice echoed in her head from a conversation in the car on the way over. The annual shareholder meeting is next week. Griffin is planning to use it to seize control. And then, a sentence she hadn't understood at the time, of course, only verified shareholders are legally permitted to attend. This one piece of paper. This wasn't a cage. This was a sword. This was the real inheritance. This was the weapon. Ding. The sound, sharp and sudden, came from the hall. The ding of the private elevator. Sadie froze, the certificate clutched in her hand. Julian Cole was waiting downstairs. Oh. The heavy study door, which she had left slightly ajar, was shoved open with a thud that shook the wall. Griffin Croft III stood there. His expensive suit was rumpled, his tie yanked loose. His eyes were bloodshot, his face a mask of contorted, animal rage. "I knew it," he hissed, his voice a low growl. "I knew I'd find a rat in my house." He stepped into the room, his wild eyes darting from the war room on the wall to the papers in her hand, finally landing on the stock certificate. His face went pale. "My lawyers are on their way up," he snarled, taking a predatory step toward her. "You are finished." Griffin just broke in, threatening her, trying to steal the one thing Silas truly left for her. He can't stand to see anyone else succeed. He believes this is his territory, his birthright, and she's just trash to be thrown out. Don't you just hate people with that kind of toxic entitlement? Smash that like button if you want to see Sadie wipe that smirk off Griffin's face. The next few minutes were a blur of shouting. Griffin's lawyers had arrived, but so had the 2 bodyguards Julian Cole had stationed in the lobby. The study, Silas's sacred, silent sanctuary, was suddenly full of loud, aggressive men in expensive suits. Griffin was apoplectic, his face a blotchy, furious red, pointing at Sadie. "She's trespassing. This is my grandfather's home. Get her out. Get her out." Sadie, clutching the single share of stock, was frozen. But Julian Cole was not. He had appeared as if from nowhere, stepping calmly between Sadie and the enraged Griffin. "This apartment," Julian stated, his voice cutting through the din, "is still an asset of the estate, of which I am the primary executor. Miss Jenkins is here as my guest. And as for this study and its contents, he gave a thin, cold smile. You'll find your grandfather was very specific. If you'll excuse us, Robert, if you please. One of the bodyguards, the man named Robert, stepped forward. He didn't touch Griffin, but his sheer, unmovable presence was a wall. He simply gestured to the door. Griffin, seeing his own lawyers suddenly looking uncertain, let out a sound of pure, strangled frustration. He gave Sadie one last look, a look that promised murder. You won't get away with this. Then he stormed out, his lawyers trailing in his wake. 20 minutes later, they were in Julian Cole's stark, modern office, high above the city. The contrast was dizzying. Sadie was still trembling, the stock certificate clutched in her hand. He's right, isn't he? She whispered, her voice shaking. He'll just stop me. He'll get a court order. He'll lock me out. I can't fight him. He's already tried, Julian said, looking at an email that had just appeared on his monitor. He almost smiled. As predicted. Griffin has filed an emergency injunction to have you barred from the penthouse, pending a competency hearing for his grandfather. So it's over, Sadie said, her shoulders slumping. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only a hollow despair. On the contrary, Julian said, steepling his fingers. He can't. Silas wasn't just a brilliant businessman, Miss Jenkins. He was a brilliant strategist. He knew this was coming. He turned the monitor to face her. In his final codicil, Silas named you the sole executor of his personal and sentimental effects. A specific, legally vague term. However, he pulled up another document. He attached a private addendum that explicitly defines those effects as, and I quote, the entire contents of the study within my private residence, including all papers, files, and personal mementos pertaining to my wife, Clara. Sadie's eyes widened. What does that mean? It means, Julian said, a genuine predator's smile touching his lips, that the study is legally yours. Not the estate's. Not Griffin's. Yours. He can't touch it. He can't lock you out. And he has no idea what's in it. He just knows you were looking, and it terrified him. For the first time in 48 hours, Sadie felt a flicker of something other than fear. It was a cold, sharp spark of anger. Good, she said, her voice small but hard. Now for the bad news, Julian continued, becoming all business. That terror will make him move faster. The annual shareholder meeting is in exactly 1 week. He pulled up a new screen, a complex corporate flowchart. Griffin has been planning this for months. He's been meeting with board members loyal to his father's memory, spreading rumors about Silas's instability. The company's profits took a small, planned dip last quarter. Planned? By Silas, Julian confirmed. He was liquidating assets, moving money, preparing for, well, for you. But Griffin is spinning it. He's painting it as a sign of a company in chaos, of a leaderless ship. His plan is simple. He will walk into that meeting, use the failed quarter as ammunition, and call for a vote of no confidence in the current board. He will then use his family name, his stock, and his allies to have himself installed as the new chairman and CEO. He intends to gut the company, sell off the assets, and take his golden parachute. Sadie looked at the single share of stock in her hand. And I'm supposed to stop him with this? No, Julian said. You're supposed to stop him with this. He nodded toward the door. With the arsenal he left you. That single share doesn't give you power. It gives you a voice. It gives you the legal right to be in that room and to be given the floor. What you say in that room, that's what's locked in that study. The next 7 days were a blur. Sadie's life split in two. By day she was at the Sunrise Diner. She sat in the cramped back office with Mitch, the smell of grease and coffee her only companion. She looked at the real, horrifying numbers. She placed orders. She signed checks. She learned the brutal, unforgiving mechanics of a failing business. She gave Mitch a raise, and then she gave Sherry one too. You're the manager now, Mitch, she'd said. You deserve to be paid for it. Sherry, you're head of staff. I need you. I can't do this alone. They stared at her, their resentment warring with a new, dawning bewilderment. But by night she was at the penthouse. The bodyguards would drive her from Queens to the Upper East Side, a silent, surreal journey between her two new worlds. She'd let herself into the silent, mausoleum-like apartment and lock herself in the study. At first it was overwhelming. A wall of noise. She was just a waitress. She was an art student. What did she know about leveraged buyouts? What was a proxy battle? The imposter syndrome was a physical, crushing weight, making it hard to breathe. Her hands, calloused from carrying hot plates, shook as she held decade-old merger agreements worth hundreds of millions. She was terrified, drowning in the feeling that she was a fraud in a dead man's suit. Meanwhile, she'd see Griffin on the news on financial channels, oozing confidence, talking about his bold new vision for the company. He'd never worked an honest day in his life, never faced a single consequence, and he was 100% certain he deserved to run a billion-dollar empire. That unearned, toxic arrogance is a poison, isn't it? It rots everything it touches. If you're tired of phonies like Griffin failing upwards while good people are crippled by doubt, comment "Show them Sadie" down below. That thought, the sheer, staggering injustice of it, is what hardened her fear into fuel. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a detective. She was an artist, and this was just a different kind of canvas. She began to see the patterns. The artist's eye for detail, the waitress's memory for orders, it was the same skill set. She didn't just read. She absorbed. She followed the colored strings. She matched names to offshore shell corporations. She found the real reason for the failed $30 million tech venture. It wasn't a failure, it was a front. She traced the wire transfers, a complex, layered system designed to siphon money from the company into Griffin's personal, untraceable accounts. She didn't just find recklessness. She found crime. She read Silas's private journals, his grief for Clara a raw, open wound on every page. She learned about his quiet, decades-long war against the man who had ruined his wife's cafe. She learned his philosophy: business is not about money, it is about legacy. A man who builds nothing but wealth dies poor. She wasn't fighting for the diner. She wasn't even fighting for the money. She was fighting for Clara. She was fighting for the lonely old man who had looked at a world of sharks and, at the very end, placed his entire bet on a single act of kindness. On the final night, at 4 a.m., she and Julian Cole sat at the massive mahogany desk, the war room spread out before them. They had a plan. It was audacious. It was terrifying. It relied entirely on Sadie's ability to walk into that boardroom and do the one thing she had never done: command a room full of the most powerful people on earth. "It's not enough to just expose him," Sadie said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion, but ringing with a new, cold authority. "He'll just claim it's slander, tie it up in court. We can't just destroy him. We have to replace him with something better." Julian looked at her, a new respect in his eyes. "He will never see it coming." Sadie picked up the single share of stock. It no longer felt insignificant. It felt as heavy as a sword. "Let him come," she said. The boardroom for the annual shareholder meeting was not a room, it was an amphitheater. A cavern of dark, polished wood and tiered seating that rose into the shadows, all focused on a long, elevated table at the front where the board of directors sat like a tribunal of severe, gray-haired judges. The air was thick with the scent of old money and new-brewed coffee, and the low, powerful murmur of hundreds of investors, analysts, and media members. Sadie walked in and the sound faltered. Every head turned. They saw a 24-year-old woman in a simple, perfectly tailored navy blue suit, the first truly new garment she'd bought with her $250,000. It was a suit of armor. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her face pale but set. Julian Cole was at her side, carrying a slim briefcase. They took their seats in the front row, reserved for shareholders. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, whispering, "Who is she?" At the podium, adjusting the microphone, Griffin Croft III saw her. His face, which had been arranged in a mask of charming confidence for the investors, froze for a split second. Then a slow, contemptuous smirk spread across his lips. He leaned into the microphone. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice oozing practiced charisma. "If you'll just give us one moment, it appears we have a brief interruption." He nodded directly at Sadie. "It seems the catering staff has wandered into the wrong room. If someone could please direct this young woman to the service entrance." A few of his allies on the board snickered. The camera from a financial news network panned to her. Sadie felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up her neck, but she didn't shrink. She met his gaze across the vast room. "I am a shareholder," Sadie said. Her voice didn't carry. The chairman of the board, a man named Henderson, looked down at her, annoyed. What was that? Sadie stood up. She felt her knees shaking, but she locked them. Julian Cole placed the single share certificate on the table in front of her. I am a shareholder, she said again, her voice clearer, colder. Miss Sadie Jenkins. And I have a right to be here. Griffin's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. Before he could retort, Henderson banged his gavel. The shareholder is recognized. Please be seated. Mr. Croft has the floor. Griffin, visibly irritated by the interruption, launched his attack. He was a natural performer. He spoke of legacy, of his family's name, of a bold new vision for the 21st century. He painted the current board, and by extension Silas, as stagnant, out of touch, and lost in the past. He held up the previous quarter's profit and loss statement. These, he boomed, are the numbers of a company in freefall. A ship without a captain. My grandfather was a legend, but his time has passed. This board has failed in its fiduciary duty. That is why I am calling for a vote of no confidence and nominating myself to take the helm. It is time for a real Croft to lead Croft Consolidated. A tense, excited murmur went through the room. His allies on the board voiced their support. The momentum was entirely his. The current CEO offered a weak, numbers-heavy defense that Griffin shot down with ease. Is there anyone else, Henderson, the chairman asked, his voice dry, who wishes to speak on this motion before we call the vote? This was it. With a silent nod from Julian, Sadie stood up again. I do. A collective sigh of annoyance went through the room. Griffin rolled his eyes, a picture of performative patience. With all due respect, madam, this is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, not a coffee klatch. Unless you have a specific financial point to make? I do, Sadie said. Her voice, amplified by the microphone at her seat, trembled for a single beat, then found its strength. My name is Isabella Rossi, she corrected herself, a slip from the old story. My name is Sadie Jenkins. Mr. Croft speaks of his grandfather's legacy. I'm here today because I, too, was a part of Silas Croft's legacy. Not the legacy of billions, but the legacy of his final 8 months. She didn't look at Griffin. She looked at the faces of the board members, one by one. I was a waitress at the Sunrise Diner in Queens, she said, her voice clear and simple. The room, initially dismissive, grew quiet. This was not on the agenda. Your founder, Silas Croft, came in every single morning at 7:15. He was a quiet, grumpy old man in a worn-out coat. My coworkers ignored him. He was a lousy tipper. But I saw a man who was profoundly lonely. And I saw that his hands shook so badly with arthritis that he couldn't cut his own toast. She paused. The entire amphitheater was hanging on her words. So, every morning I cut it for him. It was a simple thing. I never expected anything for it. I was just being kind. You see, in his final year, Silas Croft wasn't interested in acquiring more companies. He was interested in character. He was sitting in a greasy spoon watching people. And he saw his own grandson, Mr. Croft, come in and throw $100 bill at him, calling his grandfather's chosen sanctuary a dump. This is pathetic. Griffin roared, his charming facade shattering. This is a farce. We are talking about the future of a global corporation, not breakfast. Sadie turned to him, and her fear was finally, completely gone. You're right, Griffin, she said, her voice like ice. Let's talk about billions. She nodded to Julian Cole. Mr. Chairman, Julian said, standing up. As an executor of Mr. Croft's personal effects, I have been authorized by Ms. Jenkins, the legal owner of those effects, to present documents pertinent to this board's fiduciary duty. A massive screen lit up behind the board. The document that appeared was the scathing report from Silas's study. This, Sadie said, her voice ringing with conviction, is Griffin Croft's bold new vision. A $30 million loss on a failed crypto venture, GC Coin. A venture, as the notes show, he funded by siphoning capital from a subsidiary, illegally. Gasps echoed through the room. Griffin's face went white. This is slander. These are fakes. Are they? Sadie countered. The slide changed. Copies of cashier's checks. Casino markers from Las Vegas. Or are these? Over $5 million in personal gambling debts, paid off by Silas to avoid a scandal. Is this the financial discipline you want at the helm? The room was in an uproar. Henderson was banging his gavel. And finally, Sadie said, her voice cutting through the noise. Silas's own assessment. The screen changed to a high-resolution scan of Silas's handwritten note. He has the ambition of a king but the judgment of a fool. He will burn my life's work to the ground to warm his own hands. Griffin Croft III stood frozen, his mouth open, his face a mask of utter ruin. He had been clinically, perfectly, and publicly vivisected. The room was dead silent. Sadie had won. She had destroyed him. But she wasn't finished. Griffin is right about one thing, she said, turning back to the stunned, silent board. This company does need new heart. It has lost its way. It's forgotten what it came from. She took a deep breath. This was the checkmate. Silas Croft didn't build his empire on numbers. He built it on the memory of his wife, Clara, and her small neighborhood cafe. He built it on the idea that business isn't just about profit. It's about building something that lasts. He left me his legacy and I intend to honor it. Therefore, as a shareholder, I propose an amendment to the company charter. The creation of the Clara Croft Foundation, to be funded by 10% of this company's annual net profits. Its sole mission will be to provide scholarships and zero-interest loans to small businesses, like the one this company was built on. She looked directly at the oldest board member, a man who had known Silas for 50 years. And I nominate myself, Sadie Jenkins, owner of the Sunrise Diner and Silas Croft's chosen heir, to run it. It was a masterstroke. She wasn't asking for the company. She wasn't asking for power. She was asking for purpose. She had taken their corporate legacy and given it a soul. The old board member stared at her for a long moment, his eyes shining. He slowly, deliberately began to clap. Then another joined and another. Within seconds, the entire room, investors, analysts, even the media, was on its feet, a thunderous wave of applause washing over her. The vote was a formality. Griffin's motion was unanimously crushed. Sadie's proposal was accepted with a standing ovation. The resolution was a quiet montage over the following year. The Sunrise Diner, closed for 1 month, reopened. It was clean, bright, and the kitchen was state-of-the-art, but the mustard yellow vinyl of Booth 4 remained preserved. A small, tasteful brass plaque was affixed to the wall above it, Silas's Corner. Mitch, now a partner in the business and impeccably dressed, beamed at the new, full register. Sherry, her hair neatly styled, smiled, a real, genuine smile, as she trained 3 new enthusiastic waitstaff, showing them how to be efficient, not rude. Sadie's Brooklyn apartment, now bright and airy. The canvases were no longer dusty. They were vibrant, explosions of color, covering every wall. She was painting, a smudge of cobalt blue on her cheek, a look of pure, unadulterated peace on her face. The final shot, Sadie in her navy blue suit, standing in a small, hopeful bakery. She was handing the first check from the Clara Croft Foundation to a young entrepreneur, a woman who looked as terrified and hopeful as Sadie once had. Griffin, of course, was left with nothing but his $20 million and his rage, screaming at his lawyers about his money, his company. He believed it was all his for the taking, a prize he was owed. He represents the worst kind of greed, the kind that believes decency is a weakness and kindness is for fools. You've just seen what true character looks like. You've seen that it's not what you're given, but what you build. Hit that subscribe button to join a community that values decency over dollars. Only the Griffins of the world would refuse.